Good evening, all.
Good evening, Mac.
How you doing?
Good, good.
Hey, Mac.
Hello. Then how are we doing on trustee attendance?
We're complete now.
We're complete.
Trustee Rodan will not be attending, so we're complete.
Okay, good, excellent. Good evening. We got okay. So it's 5 o'clock, so why don't we get started? Like I said, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. And can we pull up the agenda? And there we go. Thanks so much, Nene. Do you mind taking the roll, please?
Yes, Mary Kate Murin,
Present.
Max Starks,
Present.
Tamalid Hogan.
I'm gonna
Tamalid
message her,
Hogan.
Nanette. I don't know that her sound is working.
Yeah, she's muted, but she is here. Norm Jordan, as I said, is absent, is not attending. Jeff Sattler. Jeff Sattler,
I saw Jeff. Let's
yes.
see.
Mhm.
I saw him a couple minutes ago. I'm not quite sure where he
Yes.
is now. But
Jeff, can you hear us? Jeff?
oh, there he is.
Oh,
Let's see.
He is.
Yeah,
Here.
Jeff, if you can nod, Jeff, that'd be good. That works.
Yes. So we have 4 out of 5.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much. Why don't we move right into our fiscal year 2022 fourth quarter trust fund report. Mr. Tudrin.
Okay, thank you very much and good evening, everyone. Just as a reminder, it's a requirement of the trust fund guidelines that we share with you, the fourth quarter trust fund report. And so this is our final report for FY22. You also may recall that the audited FY22 financial statements were presented at last month's meeting. They were presented, they were approved, and this is just a different version of those financial statements. This version doesn't include the state appropriations. It doesn't include grants, investment income, HERF funds or COVID expenses or depreciation. This is just our trust funds. So basically we're looking at general education, health, and capital improvement. And if you could advance the next slide, please. Thank you. So we'll start off with our general education trust fund. Generally, everything is in line with what we would expect it to be, especially considering the financial statement presentation that we received last month. There are 2 line items that I would like to call out. The first line item is NN, construction and improvement of facilities. That is showing no expenses. The reason that's showing no expenses is because, as a reminder, we always spend down our carryover funds first. So the facilities project expenses that carried forward from FY21 to FY22, we spend those first. We do not reflect those expenses on this trust fund report. The next thing that we did is once we spent down the carryover funds is we spent down the state appropriation. So the state appropriation is a use it or lose it. So we transitioned, and that's why you're not seeing any expenses reflected on this trust fund report. That is not to say that we didn't have any NN related expenses. On the second item that I wanted to call out is on the contingency line. There's also no expenses, and that's a reflection of we did receive HERF funding, so that helped with certain expenses at the college, and we also recognize underspending in various line items. So therefore, it wasn't necessary for us to go to this contingency line and record any expenses against that line. And if I can ask to move to the next slide. This is our health trust fund. Again, this is showing in line with what we would expect it to be. The one line that I wanted to point out here is the clinic fees revenues. It's basically double the amount that was budgeted. And the reason that it was doubled is because the budget was a conservative budget, not knowing what COVID would bring us, what the pandemic would bring us by way of clinic fee revenues. Fortunately, things turned out better and we did exceed what was budgeted and projected in that line. Everything else does seem to be in line. Can you please move to the next slide? And this is our capital improvement trust fund. So again, your revenues are in line with expectations. And for the expenditures, while we do have the waivers that are reflected there, you're not seeing any of the NN capital improvement expenditures. It coincides with exactly what I said before about spending the carryover first in the state appropriation as well. I'm going to pause right there to see if there's any questions on the trust fund report before we go on to the vendor expenditure report.
And John, you answered my only question on the prior trust fund where it was double, you know, what it had been for the budgets. But other than that, I was good.
Great, thank you. We can move to the next slide then. Okay, so this is our vendor expenditure trust fund report. This is showing all of the vendors that we spent at least $20,000 throughout the year. As was requested for this version for the fourth quarter report, we did highlight any of the new vendors that are showing up on this report for the first time this fiscal year. So you'll see them all highlighted in yellow. And there could be two reasons why they're highlighted in yellow. It could be a matter of we've been working with a vendor throughout the year, and it's just in the fourth quarter where they exceeded the $20,000 threshold. Or it could be a matter of the type of project or the type of expense we only encounter it at the end of the fiscal year. So for example, you're going to see a lot of facilities projects because the end of the year is a great time for us to undertake in various facilities projects. Also included in this report on the far right two columns, we're indicating whether we are capitalizing and depreciating any part of those expenses associated with that particular vendor, as well as whether or not any portion of that expense was funded from DCAM. And I'll also pause there to see if there's any questions. And if not, that's all I have for the vendor expenditure report and the trust fund reports.
Great, thank you, John. Any other questions of John? Okay, thank you very much. I guess we'll move right into our investment subcommittee report.
Okay, that's me. I know that Norman unfortunately wasn't, so Mac, you got to put up with me for a little bit. So we did have our subcommittee report meeting on November 10th. Matt Fertini, our senior analysis and consultant with Fiducian Advisors, presented the quarterly report. Mike Chase, a partner, was also on the call. Matt reviewed the fiduciary governance calendar for the third quarter, which consisted of the investment policy review and stewardship best practices. And given that review, there's no need to make any changes to the investment policy statement at all. And that the subcommittee continues to incorporate effective investment committees and no changes are needed due to the good habits. Assets under management at Fiducian as of September 30th total $25 million. The long-term account consists of $19.2 million, though it recognized a minus 6.1 return for the quarter, slightly underperforming the benchmark of minus 5.9. The short-term account consisted of $5.7 million, recognizing a 0.2 return for the quarter, minus 0.2, outperforming the benchmark of minus 1.2%. The total value of the portfolio declined by $1.2 million as of the fiscal year to date. John Tudrin also presented an opportunity slide with the asset allocation investment. I want to turn it over to you, John, to really go through that slide with the subcommittee here.
Great, I'd be glad to. Thank you, Trustee Murrin. Okay, so this was the slide that we presented at the meeting. The intent or the purpose behind it, as you may recall, we've been sharing that we've had a healthy cash balance in our cash flow projection currently and projected through the end of the fiscal year. And we wanted to take advantage of that cash position. And in order to take advantage of it, we thought it would be appropriate to transfer funds from our operating account, also known as TD Bank, over to Fiducian. So the top portion of this slide shows the operating cash balance, and we picked the June 30th figure. So the end of this fiscal year being 10.9 million. We're using that figure because that is the lowest point of our cash flow projection throughout the rest of this fiscal year. The proposal is to transfer $6 million over to Fiduciant, which would leave us with just under $5 million in our operating accounts. The way that we would allocate the $6 million is $2 million would go to the short-term investments and $4 million would go to the long-term investments. And we'll walk through what the thought process is behind that allocation. The short-term investment pool currently consists of 5.7 million, or I should say as of September 30th, the balance was 5.7 million. When we add the $2 million, that brings the balance to 7.7 million. And we've been discussing how it's already been approved for the use of reserves, would fund $6 million towards the ship's relocation. So that's going to be coming due within the FY24 and FY25 timeframe. Once we transfer those funds, we would still have $1.7 million available in the short-term account. So we would still have funds available to us for other projects or other perhaps unforeseen expenses, other potential use of reserves and investments if needed. It's always good to have access to those funds. The long-term pool has $19.2 million available. Again, as of September 30th, we'd be transferring $4 million into that portfolio, bringing us to $23 million. The reason we want to put the $4 million into the long-term account is, again, to put the funds to work for us. And it's also an attractive entry point with the market being, what it is, as it was referenced that we did our fiscal year to date, we are recognizing a loss at this point in time. The anticipation is over a 20-year period, we could recognize an 8% annualized return on that investment. So this would give us an opportunity to, again, still have the short-term cash that's needed to help fund our needs. So we've talked about how our current budget is being balanced by $4 million in reserves. That is taken into account. When you go back to the operating cash and the top portion of this slide, we also earmarked that we have $3 million available for next year's budget. So FY24's budget, we still have enough cash available where we wouldn't need to necessarily divest to help balance our budget or to help fund those operating expenses. So this really kind of sets us up in a nice, comfortable position where we can meet our current needs while still taking advantage of the attractive entry points. Are there any questions on that or comments or recommendations?
Yeah, John, thanks for walking through this. When I went through this earlier, I had a couple of questions for Andrea, and she was able to kind of get me straight on. My questions were more around the timing of moving the 6 mil split between short and long term. And I was thinking put more in the long term initially, since we're not going to need it until 24, 25, and then move it back over in the short term when needed. But she explained to me that per our rules, if you will, around our investments, we don't like to pull money out of long term. So that was fair. So I guess my only other question at this point is, how much did we carry in short term prior to her funds and COVID and all that? Was it around $2 million? It's just, I just don't recall.
Yeah, it was a little bit more than that. So prior to COVID, we wanted to make sure that we had enough in our short term to meet current liabilities, or actually all liabilities. And so there was actually a formula that we used where we would back out any liabilities associated with our pension and OPEB liabilities, because those aren't actually cash entries to us. And so generally speaking, we would be looking somewhere in the vicinity of $4 million. During COVID, that allocation, that formula didn't necessarily work because of how everything ended up being allocated where it would allow us to invest everything into investments, which isn't a prudent investment strategy. So that's when we made the decision to keep $4 to $5 million in the short-term pool. The 1.7 does fall below that threshold, but we still do have the a decent operating cash balance where together we still have funds to meet current needs or short-term needs.
Mac, I would add, and again, it's pretty fantastic for our fiscal team in one slide, right, to get their hands around all this information. I mean, it's great to have so many things in one place. The one that I looked at is operating cash. And again, for our newer trustees, in the not too distant past, if I recall, there were times in our flow where we would have about $1 million in cash, really begging the question around our liquidity, and at times where we would need to draw out of the short-term investment. So it shows you just how strengthened the position is, even with this push into investments about where our cash lands. So it's great to see that. I definitely hear you, Mac, around the short-term investment. I'm not going to anticipate that if we continue to be the active managers that we are, that we'll see a short-term investment come as low as 1.7. Again, we continue to beat budget. We're going to continue to try to work to do that. And it is still a bit of a guess right now as to when we'll need to put our own dollars on the table for that School of Health relocation. So again, I call those pieces out because the cash and that liquidity position continues to be a real strength for us in the way that this has been framed.
Got it. Thank you both. Any other questions of John? Okay, John, thank you very much for taking us through this.
Thank you.
Great. I guess with that, we'll move right into our financial update and outlook.
Okay. If we can just advance one slide, please. I'm sorry, one more. Okay. So we wanted to start off the presentation for cash flow before we get into our traditional projection to take a step back to look at the bigger picture. You've seen this slide previously. We wanted to, since the financial statements were just updated or finalized, I should say, we wanted to update this slide. So just to kind of give you a quick orientation and walkthrough, we're looking at both our unrestricted net position and our cash and investment balance. All of our solid lines are actual figures, and then the dotted lines are our projections. So, for example, the orange line is representing our cash and investment total. And as of FY22, so the financial statements that were just approved, we're looking at $42.8 million combined. When we look at our unrestricted net position, or also known as your unrestricted reserves, we have $27.3 million. Something to point out and to take notice of is our pre-pandemic balances of $19.7 million for cash and investments and our $6.3 for unrestricted reserves. Both of those will be increasing through our projection of FY26. So we're going to be increasing our cash balance to $23.3 million, increasing our unrestricted reserves or unrestricted net position to $7.8 million. And that's after our use of reserves. That's after the operational support. That's after our investment into the ship's relocation. Andrea is going to walk through the elements of what I just mentioned there. That's indicated in the box in the top right-hand corner of this slide. She'll walk through that in a little more detail a few slides a little bit later on. But this just kind of gives you a big picture as to where we currently are, where we were pre-pandemic, and where we're projected to wind up after we walk through the next few years. Again, just as a disclaimer, if you will, there are things that the projections don't take into consideration as far as depreciation and our pension and OPEB liabilities. So full disclosure, those aren't included in this, and those are also things that we cannot control or project. Are there any questions before I move on to the next slide?
It's a very good picture. Appreciate the walkthrough.
Good. Thank you. Can we move to that next slide, please? And this is our traditional projection. Again, this is our normal trend of what we expect to see from the cash flow. This is also why we just had the discussion of why we're interested in transferring funds over to investments. And this is also where it helps to illustrate that our low point for our cash is at the end of the fiscal year. So between now and then, if we transfer the $6 million, we're still in a comfortable cash position for our operating expenses. But this is also where we're indicating that we currently have, just lost the number right here. Okay. Oh, my apologies. So this is where we currently have the 12.6 million available as of last week. And we see that downward trend. And if I could ask you to move to the next slide. This is just a summary by line item. The second to the last column on the right shows you where we're going to be projected to wind up with a cash balance of $10.9 million. That's what we saw on the previous slide. Once we transfer the $6 million, that 10.9 million will be reduced to that 4.9 million that we were discussing. And again, are there any questions? Okay.
No questions, John.
Great, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jason for the FY23 budget outlook.
Thanks,
Thank
John. Can we advance to the next slide, please? This is the detailed revenue and spending report through the end of October for everybody's reference. And if we can move to the next slide for the consolidated version. This is our summary version. Our projections have stayed the same as last month based on the information we have, with an anticipated net income of 800,000. That's made up of the 963 pickup on revenues and the additional expenses of $157,000. As of right now, we're in the process of reconciling our fall 2 enrollment numbers, but we don't anticipate any material changes based on what's been projected in this current budget. Right now, it's a little too early to project some of our other categories, but we do anticipate having additional information for the January meeting that we can report on. Any questions on these slides? All right, with that, if we could please advance to the next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Andrea. Thank you.
All right, thanks, and good evening, everyone. So we heard from John about the status of the unrestricted net position in our cash and investments, and we heard from Jason about the current fiscal year performance being favorable to budget so far. I just wanted to take a few minutes to connect the dots between our cash and investment position and our operating performance, really as a preview to our FY24 budget discussions that we'll be having starting in January, really. So believe it or not, we're already thinking about next year's budget, and just wanted to prepare for that a little bit today. So in this slide, the graph at the left, we saw this last month as well, but this is really a reminder of the declining enrollment trend with FY and seeing at the right in that graph that FY23 credits are projected to be ahead of budget, but really still down from last year. But so as Jason mentioned, that would result in or contribute to a favorable budget variance for the year. But while we're projecting to be favorable to budget for the year, it's really important to note that the budget includes $4 million of revenue from reserves, essentially that is meant to offset a $4 million structural deficit. So even if the current projection holds and we're favorable to budget by about 800,000 or even $1 million, we'll still have like a real operating deficit of whatever that difference is between that budget variance and the 4 million. So let's say it's $1 million. It still means that we still have a real deficit of $3 million. So just something important to keep in mind. So in the slide, if we move to the right hand side of the slide and we look at the box at the top, the proposed use of reserves. This is really a reminder of our 4-year plan to use $10 million of reserves over 4 years to allow for a less disruptive transition to a truly balanced budget by FY27. So you can see the line there that's in, so just to, as a reference point here, this shows the beginning balance. This is from the slide that John showed a few minutes ago. What our reserve balance is, our starting point at 27.3 million and going down to the 7.8 million by the end of FY26. The important line here is the operational support line, showing $4 million coming out of reserves in FY23 and reducing by $1 million a year over the next, over the 4-year period until by FY27, we have a truly balanced budget with no infusion from reserves. If we look at the graph then below, that's really showing us that in order to achieve our goal here of a balanced budget by FY27, we really need to pull real expenses of at least $1 million out of the budget in each of the next 4 years to have that accumulated savings or cost reduction of $4 million. And, if we take into account expected inflation, that really means finding more than $1 million a year to really net $1 million savings a year. So, as we develop the FY24 budget in the spring, we really need to be prepared to discuss strategic cost reductions in order to stay on track with our plan. And also, as a reminder, given that salaries and salary related expenses are about 60% of our total budget, we really also need to be prepared to consider how staffing will be impacted by those strategies. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
Andrea, thanks for the walkthrough. I know we're talking about kind of future looking, as we've been meeting over the last couple of years, and needing to have serious conversations like you just described, is certainly not new to us, or shouldn't be. It shouldn't be new to us. Things we should be thinking about, regularly, right? It's nice to kind of see, this kind of reinforced, like what it actually means, kind of on paper, right? But it just reinforces the need to talk about all the variables you talked about and things that, on a daily basis, we should be looking at opportunities that for us to be able to not only reduce spend, but to spend wiser, which ultimately further years down the road leads to, a lower spend, right? But at the end of the day, we got to be having value conversations as well as spend reductions. But thanks for teeing it up this way. It's very helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions on this slide? And if not, I think we can move ahead.
Great. Okay. I think that takes us to our facilities update.
Thanks, Mac. Good evening, everyone. What I'm going to do is basically explain this first slide, and to follow this slide, there'll be more detail as we go along. But by working with Deb and with Andrea, I wanted to just point out a lot of construction projects on campus. So the green portion is the DCAM, Division of Capital Asset Management. Any project that's 250,000 or higher, we have to be approved through DCAM and help us manage those projects. So in this general slide, if you recall, we received funding of 12.1 million. We have to spend this aspect of the budget by June of 2023, and I'll go through that in a minute. We also have a new bucket of funds of 11.2 million, which is through 2028. So I'll go through that in the next slide. And the second is our capital budget on an annual basis. We fund 3.1 million from our budget for specific projects, et cetera, out of our own cash. The other funds come from different areas, DCAM major projects, such as right now, the lead paint or the lead abatement on campus is awarded through a separate fund. And then we have an IT budget, which is growing for cybersecurity, et cetera. So there's a number of different projects going along at the same time. I don't know how they do it, but they do. So if you can go to the next slide, we're talking about the DCAM funded capital. And you can see that we have remaining 2.63 million that we have to fund for these projects by June of 2023, or we could lose those funds. So over the past 4 years or so, we have been funding a number of projects, and the last slide will give you into greater detail. I know it's a numbers night tonight, but there has been a lot of progress being made for our capital requirements through the DCAM process. And again, sometimes you might have if you notice the projects completed through 2022, they could have started in 2020. It takes months for a DCAM project to be budgeted, and then you're talking about going out to the market for quotes and bids. So it does overlap year over year, but the funds are allocated, and the use of funds is based on what we believe is the primary need. So I think the highlight here is we have 12 million allocated. When we spent it in 2022, what we spent thus far, and what we're spending in 2023 through the fiscal year. So I'll follow up with the last. If we go to the next slide, this is our budget of what we believe we need to spend on a number of different projects, and we are going to be completing by 2023 2.5 million. You can see some of the projects: the radio station renovation, robotics, electronics, some workforce development. So these projects are running through our budget. If you can notice that it's 5.3 million, which incorporates some of the previous year and into this year. So a lot of projects that we are working on. And again, the last slide 26 and 7 will show you some of that summary. So that's another aspect of our budget. If you go to the next slide, this is, I figure we thought that it's important for you to know that we did receive funding from the state for 30 million, and where our monies are going to relocate. And that is it's a 2-3 year project, but it's a very substantial project where I thought it'd be important for the trustees to know where the money is going and what is happening at this point in time. We're relocating from building into existing occupants in building 13, and moving the labs across the street, etc. So there's a major project going on just within these funds that Andrea and Deb are tracking, and we haven't broken ground in some of this, but it will be coming, and I can kind of show you that on the last slide, and then I'll open it up to any questions. And the last slide is this slide here, and excuse me I've got my own slide to allow me to see it larger, but what we do is I see what Deb is as project manager internally here, and Andrea following where the numbers are. You can see the DCAM funded projects at the top in gray that have been completed, and below that are projects in process. And some of these projects are planned, and sometimes we have emergencies that we have to reallocate funds. So it's it's based on safety and code. But if you notice at the bottom of this page, we have that budget of 12.1 million. And when you back into what's been completed and what's in process, you can see where we are on following the budget and the construction. So it is very, in my opinion, very well managed. We know what we have to do, and if we're looking to spend that 2.829 million by FY23, and I have a hunch we're going to do that. But there is quite a bit of moving parts with that. If you go to the next page, the third page of this attachment, it's STCC capital budget. This is where our 3.1 million annualized goes, and you can see completed projects and remaining after that for 2023. Um, and if you look through the end of that, it's a total of 5,300,000 or so that we will be spending by the end of 23. And I point out that when you really go through some of these, there are areas such as emergencies or energy saving program or life fire safety security. These are priorities that have to be done based on requirements from either the state or agencies, et cetera, that sometimes we may have budget for a different project, but if we have an emergency, we have to fund that. So sometimes we have to not go and do a project that we were really planning. But there is, as you can see, a number of items within the budget that we are currently working on and have been identified. And I'll stop talking in one more minute, but this also has to do with, I believe, Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 5 years ago we had the master plan of what we identified with the state? And I believe we're having a new version of that being done with the assistance of DCAM.
Yes, the facility condition assessment. So what we've referred to in the past is a sightlines report. There's an update of that happening in the spring by a different company called Canon, I believe. I'm looking to see if Deb is nodding. And so we'll base the spending for the next 5-year plan on the results of that assessment.
Right. Which is a big help to us as far as we know how many square feet we manage, but what is the priorities and where's best to put the money. So we do have that kind of assistance for Deb and Andrea and management to determine where should we put our funds next. So to summarize, we have DCAM project money, we have budgeted project money, we have the new building relocation money, and then we have sometimes we'll find special projects that we come up with. So there's money from different areas overlapping over different years, but I think what you see here with getting into the detail, and I'll leave it to Andrea and Deb if there's any questions or if there's any further clarification that you want to explain, but I figure we could do this every 6 months to give you an update when you see what is going on campus. I think you'll have a better idea and understanding of how these decisions are made and where the funds are coming from.
Jeff, thank you so much for walking through this detail. I mean, very, very helpful. Obviously, first time ever seeing things laid out this way. So it's very good to kind of see with all the moving parts, kind of see how it all comes together. So appreciate you kind of walking through this in that granularity. I guess my first question, I think you answered it, which is going to be that 2.63 million that we have to spend by June 30th, 2023. It sounds like you said you do have line of sight and high confidence that we're going to be able to spend that. I think the flip side is if you don't spend it, you lose it. I think it's the way it works. So I think we do have a good line of sight into being able to spend that. I think that's good. My next question is more tactical. I thought I saw a $2.8 million number on one of these slides, which is different than a 2.6. Should they be the same? Is there just a timing difference on why one says 2.8 and one says 2.6 million?
Yeah, I think so. One thing, just a reminder, whenever we talk about this is a sort of a dynamic process. And I think that in between the meeting when we met with Trustee Sattler and then we finally put things in the packet, there was just a little tweak to one of the line items. And so it's not a material difference. But yeah, I noticed the same thing here as well. That's probably something like a tweak on our part, but yeah. They should be the same. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I was less asking about them being the exact same, just conceptually. I want to make sure they were the same. They represented the same thing. So that's true. Okay, good. Yep. Awesome. Good catch. No problem. And then lastly, just so we last year we came out of our own funding of the 3.1 million. We had, I think it was 2 million of funds we didn't actually use, and now we're up to 5.3 million, right, with the carryover. And so I guess I'm wondering, how does it work with teetering between what we have from DCAM and what we have for our own? So I'm assuming DCAM funds are specific to an actual spend, right? So you can't like take the DCAM money, make sure you spend all of that, and then use our own money. So I just want to make sure I understand that relationship.
So I'll take a crack at that. So first of all, there's a lot more deferred maintenance than we will ever catch up with in terms of whatever funding we have. So we'll start with that. And so we're very thankful to have the DCAM funds to use specifically for deferred maintenance projects, and we prioritize those based on need, or what they call like priority A projects that are more critical. And then for the stick capital, we really need to use some of that for just to keep up with maintenance, but also to use for projects, for instance, like the CNA lab, for programmatic related projects. And so we do manage those. So Deb and her team manage those budgets separately, but there are certain things that could come out of one or the other budget. But, we have some discretion in terms of what types of projects, which projects get out, which deferred maintenance projects are covered under the DCAM budget versus the stick budget. But DCAM has to approve anything paid out of the DCAM budget. I'll stop there because I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, you did. That's good. That's one.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm good. Any other questions? Comments?
If I could just add just a small note, obviously, this kind of dive, and thank you, Jeff. I mean, it's tremendous to hear your fluency with all this work as a trustee. I mean, we sort of live this every day, but to see you have your hands around it is helpful, so that in turn, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, just the level of diligence that our team brings to this. There are two things I just want to call out while we're on this subject. One is the committee working on your bylaw review for this very reason will essentially, Mary Kay, as I have it, as I understand it, is prepping to recommend that you all generate a third standing committee that does focus on infrastructure, capital, and facilities, because of this level of perspective and need that we have here. So do look for that Ways and Means Committee, that some of the lift might in the future come from an additional committee, so that we can be that much more focused in these meetings, as opposed to the double duty that Ways and Means provide sometimes. So know that piece. The second one is an additional anchoring aspect of all of this work. Again, multiple streams of funding, both from the college, out of operations, and also DCAM, and throw in a major project. And and by the way, anything over 300,000 DCAM makes us do a study on, right? Yeah. All of this is really ground in our campus master plan, which is already begging the question with this awarding of the School of Health relocation for us starting next year to really turn our attention to the need for a new and revitalized campus master plan that will help us further than help establish what are the priorities, because we can do an inventory with DCAM funding, and it's going to tell us, Stick, you have $300 million still of deferred maintenance, and we can put some need and necessity on that. I mean, it's stunning when you look at the detail. 1.2 million to put a new roof on building 2, for example. I mean, that really takes the theory out of this and says that's a real number, and that's a big number at a place like us. When you got to put a new roof on a building, it costs you over $1 million. So it helps to, again, reimagine. And as much as this college has been actively planning in lots of ways, getting our hands around so many things, we're going to need to, again, plan anew what the campus master plan will tell us. So going forward, we know big and small project, what's our anchoring?
Thank you, Dr. Cook. I appreciate that perspective. If there aren't any other questions, we can move right into our president's perspective. Dr. Cook.
I already got the running start on that, everybody. I'll be brief. A couple of things, and you'll see on the agenda. I wanted to just note we had a wonderful announcement down at Union Station. And as I shared, this is really our first formal step off of Federal Street with operations. So of course, we have a footprint in the tech park with a manufacturing program. And we have designs, of course, on moving some of our School of Health over there. But there was an opportunity to get downtown in Union Station to help stand up and be the employer of record for a cyber center that's going to provide training education in the form of that cyber range, but also a SOC, a security operations center. I've shared a little bit. Our CIO, Mary Kozlowskis, has been really leading that charge. She brings a content expertise that has been essential, critical, frankly, to making it happen. But I wanted to share to this committee that with the packaging of funding, there is not an outlay from the college, which has been a really important part of allowing us to step forward. Because to run that, we needed to make sure at the very least it was budget neutral. And again, not that we don't want to, when we can, ensure that there's overhead coverage and a little bit of cost of business there. But that was the key piece I wanted to share, is not just that STIC is in that role in a very unique way. It really aligns with our mission as a technical community college, and frankly, it's somewhat unusual to have a community college able to play that role. But from a budget standpoint, it's not going to cost us. So know that piece. The second one, and again, you get the sense with all this, the college and our senior leadership is already looking ahead, constantly trying to navigate between the here and the now and the future, and toggling that, because fiscal year 24 is going to be on us before we know it. Mac will run it through the usual that you have come to expect chairing this. We're starting in February. We'll start talking about it, and then March, April, May, draft. So we'll use the usual approach, but we definitely have had those conversations internally. Budget managers already know we're not out of the woods. And you even see with the slide that we have prepped here, trying to ensure that there is a collective across all 700 of our employees to know we continue to be active managers of our fiscal situation, but we do have this structural deficit that we have to attend to every day, every week. The things I wrote down, Mac, I love how you continue to invite this notion of value conversations. Again, just two examples. One is, we know all things IT and technology have just only proven themselves during COVID to have to be an essential value consideration for us. We have probably, of the 60%, as Andrew noted, is full-time employees. We have about 1.5 million in salaries, give or take, in IT. We're going to continue to have to try to protect that in our budget, because we need all of that staffing and support for all things IT going forward. We also have about $1 million in capital projects, equipment, and needs for IT that we didn't, by the way, otherwise typically budget for. It was kind of catch as catch can. So we've got a plan for that, and we're going to have to be very protective around the value that adds to us. Even in the form of healthcare, healthcare just continues to drive programmatically, academically, so many of the conversations and the value considerations that the college provides to our regional workforce. Again, healthcare is such a domineering aspect of that. To give a specific, we recently needed to change, and we had some enabling that came through collective bargaining, where we were able to elevate our nursing faculty salaries. That changed by about a figure of $150,000. That's a very real number for us in that salary area, where we know we have to try to find savings. And when there are retirements, we absolutely scrutinize those and help figure out if we have to fill that position or not. But again, just as much as we're trying to find the expense side of things, there are the need to continue to invest in valued positions like full-time nursing faculty. You have to have it to have the vibrant and large nursing program that we have today. So with that outlook, again, happy to take questions or certainly take feedback.
Dr. Cook, this is Trustee Sattler. I just wanted to point out to those of the trustees who did not attend that announcement at Union Station, the impact of what that really is a collaboration of not just the college and federal, but state and local money. The facilities we don't have to pay for, and it's going to be a sizable investment. I talked with Paul Stelcher, who has been a very good friend of STCC, and a big part of why we got involved in that, in regards that when this goes live, this whole technology center is to help businesses and municipalities not to get hacked. And as soon as we go live, we have the potential of being hacked. So we only have one shot to do this right. And it's exciting, because this is what I believe the college fundamentally should be doing, and we're in the right spot. Mary was there, obviously, gave a very nice, quick overview explanation after the formal meeting in the room that we were in, the impact of what this really means. Kudos to everyone involved. And I think this is really going to be an exciting area for the college going forward. Just my 2 cents, but there's a lot more behind the scenes than people realize, the real impact of what is needed and what this facility is going to do in the future.
Really appreciate that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Cook, and thank you, Trustee Sadler. Any other questions, comments? Okay. There's no old business. Any new business anyone wants to raise? Okay. Looks like our next meeting is January 9th, unbelievably. But before we adjourn, I just want to say happy holidays to all of you. I hope you all have a nice, happy and healthy holiday season. And it'll feel like a week from now, but January 9th, we'll get together and do this again. So thank you all very much. And then if you can call the roll to adjourn the meeting.
Yes. Mary Kate Viren,
Yes.
Max Starks,
Yes.
Samali Hogan,
Yes.
Norm Jordan, Jeff Sattler.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much,
Great. Thank you very
everybody.
much. Have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you all.
everybody.
Okay.
Be safe.
Thank you.